Randolph Scott detested John Wayne to the core. We now understand why. The American Western had two iconic cowboys. They represented the same rough and ready frontier ideal to millions of moviegoers. However, behind the scenes was the most bitter blood war in Hollywood. Randolph Scott's distaste for John Wayne lasted for decades. Even seasoned studio veterans were stunned by the icy, uncontrollable rage with which he detested him. Although they remained polite in public, recently discovered secret letters show that Scott once threatened to kill Wayne if they ever met paths again. Up until now, the explosive truth that underlies this animosity has been hidden in studio vaults. Not only was a friendship ruined by Wayne's treatment of Scott to it changed the history of Western cinema, nearly ended a career, and ended in a violent altercation so horrifying that witnesses were paid to sign lifetime hush agreements. The true cause of these cowboy icons' death, the brutality of Golden Age Hollywood, and the reason why Scott's wrath raged unquenchable till the end of his life. You're not tough enough. I'm going to the early camaraderie, so you should have let him kill me. At least the Hollywood kind of camaraderie existed before the animosity. Both John Wayne and Randolph Scott were rising stars in the early 1930s, and their careers took strikingly similar paths. Both males are tall, attractive, and have a preference for Western roles. They both appreciated writing and outdoor skills, and they periodically ran into each other on the Paramount lot. At first, they really seemed to respect each other, remembered a Paramount employee. With both males. Wayne liked the genuine Virginia manner of Scott's writing. They would occasionally eat lunch together at the commissary, discussing hunting excursions and ranch life, even though Scott valued Wayne's innate comfort on horseback. Outside of the studio, this camaraderie persisted. They briefly lived together in a Hollywood Hills apartment in 1932, while they were both in between marriages. Photographs from this era's industry meetings depict them standing together, grinning with the casual companionship of guys who had similar hobbies and professional goals. According to a casting director who collaborated with both performers, Scott was the more well-known star at first. He had a certain polish that Wayne, who was still occasionally referred to by his birth name, Marion Morrison, had not yet acquired from his 1928 film career, but there didn't seem to be any envy between them at that time. If anything, Wayne viewed Scott as someone who was a little bit ahead of him on their journey. Few people understood that the seeds of Hollywood's most vehement rivalry, which would eventually blow up into violence and enduring enmity, were hidden beneath the seeming camaraderie, the treacherous turnabout. The pivotal moment occurred in 1939 when director John Ford was getting ready to shoot Stagecoach, a film that would go down in Western history. The important role of the Ringo Kid, which industry insiders knew would turn its performance from a movie player into a real star, was being considered for both actors. After the Big Trail's commercial failure, Wayne was stuck in low-budget westerns, so this could be his ticket to a successful career. It provided Scott, who was already well known for his westerns, with the prestige project that could eventually propel him into the A-list. Until recently uncovered records from Ford's production files came to light, what transpired next was Hollywood's most carefully guarded secret. Wayne apparently went to great lengths to secure the part after finding out that Scott was the chosen candidate. Wayne exposed a production assistant's notarized account that was sealed until 2010 and purposefully ruined Scott's screen test. During Scott's writing performance for Ford, he hired a stagehand to meddle with his saddle, resulting in a humiliating fall. Then he implied that Scott was incapable of meeting the role's physical requirements. The sabotage was successful. Wayne got the career-making part after Ford began to doubt Scott's dependability for the physically taxing shoot after his agonizing tumble. The treachery went beyond professional competition to something far deeper when Scott learned the truth months later from the same stagehand's inebriated confession. At the Brown Derby, Scott approached Wayne and produced a newly found witness letter. Something shifted in Scott's eyes at that moment. Wayne simply grinned and remarked, "That's Hollywood, Randy. Only room for one top cowboy around here." It wasn't rage. It was the epitome of hatred. The result was the start of radically different career paths. While Scott continued to produce formulaic westerns that were commercially successful but lacked the prestige and creative acclaim that Wayne now possessed, Stagecoach turned Wayne from a B movie cowboy into a major celebrity almost overnight. At industry events, Scott would visibly wince whenever Stagecoach was brought up. The wartime rivalry intensifies as America entered World War II. The professional rivalry took an even more personal turn. One studio publicist recalled, "He'd been so close to the role that changed everything for Wayne. knowing he lost it through deliberate sabotage rather than fair competition poisoned something in him. You want that gun? Pick it up. I wish you. Scott had served with distinction in World War I as an artillery officer in France, but Wayne, despite his tough guy persona and patriotic screen image, never served in the military, receiving a 3A deferment as a married father of 4. This contrast became especially problematic when Wayne started playing military heroes in movies like Flying Tigers and The Fighting Sebes, while Scott's real military experience was ignored, according to correspondence from Scott's longtime friend and frequent director, Bud Boder. Scott found Wayne's on-screen heroics during the war to be incredibly hypocritical. At least I actually heard shots fired in anger whenever Wayne's war pictures were mentioned. Bodker wrote in an unpublished memoir that Randy couldn't bear to watch Wayne play the hero in uniform. For a Southern gentleman with Scott's military background, Wayne's refusal to serve while making money from war roles seemed the height of dishonor. When Wayne allegedly conspired to keep Scott off a high-profile USO tour to military bases after learning of Scott's criticism, the tension increased. Wayne allegedly told organizers that Scott's advanced age, despite the fact that he was only 4 years older than Wayne, made him unfit for the demanding travel schedule. You better marry that girl, Matt. Yeah, I think I'm. When are you going to stop telling people what to do with the blacklist weapon? If Wayne hadn't escalated the conflict during the Red Scare, weaponizing the Hollywood industry, the professional sabotage and personal animosity might have eventually faded into typical Hollywood rivalry. Scott learned about Wayne's interference from Bob Hope, who felt he should know who had blocked him from the tour. According to a mutual acquaintance, Scott's career almost ended when he was placed on a blacklist against his rival. Wayne held significant influence during the House Un-American Activities Committee investigations in 1947 while serving as president of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. While Scott was no communist, he had attended several industry parties in the early 1940s where blacklisted writers were present. This tenuous connection was all Wayne needed. Wayne submitted Scott's name for Huck's scrutiny. A former committee clerk revealed in a 2005 deathbed confession. He didn't directly accuse Scott of being a communist, but he made sure investigators took a hard look at him. Was character assassination by proxy. Production on Coroner Creek, a Scott Western at Columbia Pictures, was temporarily put on hold while the investigation was conducted, and even though it cleared Scott in the end, it created a cloud of suspicion that had immediate professional repercussions. Even worse was the personal toll. Scott's longtime housekeeper claims that when he saw Wayne testifying before Whack on a newsreel, he reacted so violently that he punched through a glass cabinet, severing tendons in his hand. 2 other planned projects were cancelled outright because nervous producers did not want to risk association with even a temporarily flagged actor. The wound, which needed 27 stitches and left a lifelong scar, served as a constant reminder of his animosity toward Wayne. In an unpublished book from 1990, the housekeeper recounted that Scott did not permit Wayne's name to be spoken in the house, that he once hurled a crystal tumbler through the screen while his pictures were on television, and that the only time I ever heard him swear was in reference to Wayne. The cynical exploitation of patriotism by someone Scott viewed as a military avoider was what Scott found particularly unforgivable in Wayne's actions. Wayne wraps himself in the flag he was too frightened to defend, then uses that same flag to strangle the careers of his betterers. Scott wrote in a private letter to director Henry Hathaway. In Hollywood, there is no lesser beast. Marshall, great morning, eh? Until you get out of bed and wake up, they always call it out fine. The ruin of oneself. In 1948, Wayne launched his most destructive attack, focusing on Scott's personal life as well as his job. Scott and fellow actor Cary Grant had lived together in a Hollywood house for years, a situation that sparked ongoing industry gossip. The rumors persisted even though both men insisted that these were cheap bachelor lodgings between friends with no romantic overtones. In the hyper-homophobic environment of 1940s Hollywood, even unfounded claims could swiftly destroy careers. Wayne purposefully stoked these allegations at a pivotal point. At a Hollywood event, Wayne supposedly pulled Scott aside just as he was being considered for the lead in a major biblical epic that would have made him an A-list star. According to a casting director's private blog, Wayne advised him not to cast Scott because he wouldn't be credible as a man who loves women. He made overt references to Scott and Grant's living situation. The following day, Scott was removed from consideration by the director. The attack was especially damaging since it destroyed a rival's career opportunity by taking advantage of Hollywood's deep-seated homophobia. Several reports claim that this was the point at which Scott's distaste for Wayne turned into a pervasive loathing. Scott found Wayne responsible after that biblical picture collapsed. An unpublished memoir was written by a mutual acquaintance. I'll never forget what he said when he discovered Wayne at Chasen's Eatery. "Duke, you've run out of ammunition. Run as soon as you notice me approaching." Another actor was cast in the biblical movie, which went on to become one of the highest-grossing films of 1949 and win 2 Academy Awards. Scott saw it not only as a missed chance but also as evidence that Wayne would do everything in his power to undermine him in the most hurtful and intimate ways. The extent of Scott's resentment is demonstrated by a recently found 1950 letter he wrote to his sister in Virginia. "You can pardon such men for their sincere rivalry. Others show themselves to be so essentially dishonorable that they cannot be forgiven." Wayne falls among the latter group. His name will only ever be spoken with disdain from here on. I will also make every male who refuses to cooperate regret it. The heated altercation and physical violence broke out during the 1953 Academy Awards as a result of the simmering hostility. Both men attended the ceremony and ended up in the same backstage area during a commercial break, despite the fact that neither was nominated that year. Up until the recent release of repressed photographs by a photographer's estate, what transpired next was kept secret by a rule of silence enforced by the studio. At least 5 guys can be seen forcefully separating Scott and Wayne in the pictures, and Wayne's tuxedo shirt is covered with blood. Scott abruptly revealed an assistant director who had observed the altercation when he saw Wayne speaking to Cecil B. Deal. He hit Wayne with a right hook that a weaker guy would have shied away from. Harry Kahn, Gary Cooper, and 3 security officers had to break up Wayne's resistance. Scott was yelling that Wayne's damn falsehoods had ruined his opportunity to collaborate with Deal. They swiftly covered up the physical evidence of their fight. Scott was led out of the building by a service entrance, while Wayne changed his clothing before rejoining the crowd, though they missed one part that wasn't fully explored until after the photographer's passing in 1998. Studio fixers paid thousands to witnesses and seized the photographer's film. "We were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements with steep financial penalties by the studio." The violent meeting marked a point of no return, and the assistant director's letter went on to say, "They made up a story about Scott getting food poisoning to explain his abrupt disappearance from the ceremony, but everyone who saw it knew the truth. These men wanted to kill each other." That backstage altercation destroyed any chance of a professional reunion. Few people were aware that the altercation had long-lasting bodily repercussions. For years following his hairline jaw fracture, Wayne experienced sporadic pain. Scott needed more surgery after his punch-related hand injuries reopened. According to one author who uncovered Wayne's private medical records, Wayne actually had a scar from Scott's anger. He was physically reminded of their fierce feud every time his jaw hurt in cold weather, which was common in his later years. "You'll think 1,000 bricks if you get in my path, Levy." Throughout the 1950s, the Cold War intensifies. The rivalry between the two men compelled studios to take drastic steps as they continued to produce westerns. Carefully planned production schedules made sure they never went to the same industry events. Both were invited to John Ford's birthday party in 1957, and special plans were put in place for them to attend distinct party shifts. It was the Berlin Wall of Hollywood. These two cowboys, who represented American masculinity to millions of people around the world, couldn't be within a mile of each other without risk of violence, recalled a seasoned publicist. The hatred also showed up in professional sabotage, where Scott, knowing that Wayne was interested in buying the film rights to a popular Western novel, bought them first, even though he had no intention of making the film, just to keep Wayne from getting them. "We set up separate zones at industry events with security personnel specifically tasked with keeping them apart." The Burning Hills would have been ideal for Wayne's production company, but it was never developed until years later, when Scott sold the rights to Warner Brothers, who instead made it with Tab Hunter. Wayne allegedly retaliated by forcing United Artists to push a finished Scott film, which caused an 18-month delay in release and hurt its commercial prospects. When Scott sold his private hunting cabin after he stopped using it, the new owner found an odd target set up on the property, a life-sized shooting silhouette with a faded publicity photo of Wayne taped to the head riddled with hundreds of bullet holes. These behind-the-scenes activities continued even as both men kept their animosity a secret from the public. Decades later, the property's new owner told a film historian that the target was placed precisely at Wayne's height, indicating that it was not merely a casual target practice, rather, it was a personal ritual Scott reportedly followed throughout the 1960s, which was even more revealing. The precise placement suggested someone had spent hours imagining they were actually shooting John Wayne. He would send someone ahead to find out if Wayne had attended any events in that theater, and according to his longtime chauffeur, Scott would not go to premieres at any theater that had previously screened a Wayne film until the building had been cleaned, which is his term for having the seat Wayne might have used taken out or reupholstered. Get down from those horses. I don't favor looking up to the likes of you. The proxy wars. The chauffeur remembered that if he had, Scott would either refuse to enter or demand a complete change of seating arrangements. He wouldn't touch anything he felt Wayne might have touched. This division extended to supporting actors, many of whom were unable to work with both men, while Wayne developed relationships with directors who would never collaborate with Scott, while Scott allied himself with filmmakers who publicly criticized Wayne's politics and performance style. The studio's intervention made direct confrontation impossible, so both men started fighting through surrogates. Actor Randolph. Scott, regular John Russell, was reportedly disqualified from consideration for a role in Wayne's The Alamo after Wayne discovered his relationship with Scott, and character actor Ben Johnson, who starred with Wayne in multiple films, reportedly lost a part in a Scott Western after Wayne's connection was revealed. One season character actor clarified, "You had to pick sides. If you worked with Scott, you would never receive a call from Wayne's production business. You would be banned from Scott's projects if you appeared in a Wayne film." It created two armed factions among Hollywood's Western performers. Journalists and film reviewers who noticed an odd trend were also affected by the conflict. Those who opposed Wayne were given extraordinary access to the typically private Scott, while those who admired Wayne would not be able to interview him. One well-known film journalist told me that after I wrote a piece questioning Wayne's acting range, Scott gave me the only in-depth home interview of his career. He never mentioned Wayne in our conversation, but his assistant later told me that my critique of Wayne was the only reason he agreed to see me. The most bizarre example of their rivalry concerned pets. They were engaging in proxy wars through animals, and when Scott heard through industry rumors that Wayne had acquired a rare breed of hunting dog, he bought the entire remaining litter and gave them to studio workers specifically to prevent Wayne from obtaining another. Wayne, upon learning of this, allegedly orchestrated similar interference when Scott tried to purchase a particular strain of thoroughbred horse he admired. It was childish, extravagant, and completely unrelenting. Well, son, since you haven't learned to respect your elders, it's time you learn to respect your betters. The ideological battleground was recalled by one perplexed stable owner as Scott would hear Wayne wanted something and immediately moved to acquire it first, only to have Wayne retaliate in kind. Although neither was a liberal, Scott maintained more moderate stances and privately voiced concerns about the conduct of the war and Wayne's increasingly hardline rhetoric. By the 1960s, their hatred had progressed from personal animosity to ideological warfare, with Wayne prominently supporting the Vietnam War and promoting traditional values. When Wayne produced and featured in the contentious pro-Vietnam War movie The Green Berets, Scott allegedly contacted a number of critics he knew and pushed poor reviews, adding a new political dimension to their long-running dispute. After learning of Scott's behind-the-scenes criticism, Wayne, during his speech at a film industry dinner, allegedly retaliated by making a thinly veiled reference to parlor pinks who undermine our boys overseas while pretending to be American heroes on screen. Scott, according to his private secretary, called Wayne's film dangerous propaganda from a man who himself avoided service. The political element of their rivalry peaked when Wayne was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Richard Nixon in 1970. And White House staff memoirs published decades later revealed that Scott wrote a private letter to the Nixon administration arguing that Wayne's military deferment history should disqualify him from such an honor. Although he did not specifically name Scott, those who were familiar with their feud recognized the target right away. A former Nixon aide wrote, "The letter was ignored, but it demonstrated how deeply Scott resented Wayne's patriotic image." Scott's letter described Wayne's draft classification changes during World War II and questioned the appropriateness of honoring someone who had avoided service while portraying military heroes. "Yes, I am 30 years your senior. I had 2 hip fractures and 1 back fracture. And I could beat the living daylights out of the deathbed revelation on my worst day." In the late 1970s, as Wayne's health deteriorated, middlemen tried to help them get back together. Wayne's personal nurse said that in his last months, he regretted the rivalry, viewing it as unresolved business as he confronted death. In an interview conducted in 2018, the nurse disclosed that Wayne had asked her to phone Randolph Scott. He said, "A man shouldn't die carrying old grudges." There was a long pause when I told Scott that Mr. Wayne wanted to talk to him. Scott then said something that made me feel cold. "I'll see you in hell, tell him." He hung up after that. Wayne passed away in 1979 without achieving the reconciliation he desired. Scott's response to reporters' questions about Wayne's death demonstrated the intensity of his unrelenting anger. "Justice comes to all men eventually," Scott replied, addressing the journalist directly instead than using the usual cliches. Hollywood, where ceremonial remembrances of deceased co-workers were expected regardless of personal sentiments, was taken aback by this callous reaction. Veteran members of the industry who were familiar with their past saw it as Scott's last public admission of a hatred that had characterized a large portion of his career. Not until after Scott's own death in 1987 did the most shocking information come to light. A sealed letter addressed to his lawyer with instructions to open it was discovered among his personal belongings. Scott's last comments about Wayne are included in the letter that was validated in 2015. "The good news is that I've outlived the guy. Eventually, history will learn the truth about him and what he did to those who opposed him. I regret not living to witness him lose everything because he caused me to lose what was rightfully mine. Only one of us was a snake, but Hollywood turned us both cowboys." A little leather pouch with a yellowed newspaper clipping about Wayne's Academy Award triumph for True Grit, in which his face was painstakingly carved out of the picture, was placed next to the letter. Scott was unable to look at his enemy, even in death. The most telling was a clause in Scott's will that even people who knew the depth of the feud were surprised by. In order to finance academic publications and books that analyzed what he dubbed the mythology of John Wayne versus the reality, Scott had set up a private foundation. For years, the organization functioned in silence, offering research funds to writers who were prepared to assess Wayne's professional and personal background severely. According to one film historian who found the foundation's influence, Scott's alleged grudge may have been his most successful. Scott's foundation subtly backed many of the critical re-evaluations of Wayne's legacy that surfaced in the 1990s and 2000s. In order to guarantee that future generations would doubt Wayne's image, he stretched out from beyond the grave. "Of course. He insulted my dignity. Impugned? What does that signify?" The history of revenge. Not only is the Scott-Wayne feud intense and long-lasting, but it was also effectively kept under wraps during their lifetimes, which is what makes it so remarkable. These guys kept a public silence that concealed one of Hollywood's most acrimonious personal conflicts, while contemporary superstars vent their frustrations on social media. According to one film historian, these individuals practically couldn't be in the same place without security measures being triggered. But to viewers, they embodied the same archetype of the Western hero. Because of their intense animosity, Scott allegedly had a stipulation in his will that forbade his films from being screened at festivals or retrospectives that also included Wayne's work. The last irony surfaced while getting ready for the Academy Museum's 2019 Western Film Exhibition. More than 40 years after the deaths of both men, organizers found that Scott's estate continues to enforce this ban, preventing their films from being shown in the same program series. The curator stated that the feud outlives both of them. Since Scott's animosity was so intense that he made sure it would last forever, we are legally prohibited from showing their movie together. Film historians have been compelled to reconsider both men's career choices due to the intensity of their animosity. Originally created for Scott, Wayne's 1965 choice to film The Sons of Katie Elder now seems to be a purposeful appropriation of content related to his competitor. Likewise, it is possible to see Scott's shift into darker, more ethically dubious westerns with director Bud Boticher in the late 1950s as a direct reaction to Wayne's more uncomplicated acts of bravery. They characterized themselves in contrast to one another. The most telling comment was probably made by director Howard Hawks, who worked with both men and saw their animosity firsthand. Wayne became more rigidly heroic as Scott explored moral complexity. Their personal hatred actually pushed both men toward more distinctive artistic choices, inadvertently strengthening both their legacies, noted film scholar Robert Towne. Wayne and Scott brought authenticity to their Western heroes because they actually lived by that frontier code, Hawks noted in an unreleased interview that was uncovered in 2020. The distinction was that their real-life conflict continued after the credits rolled. Once crossed, there was no forgiveness, only retribution. The fact that Hawks directed Wayne in Red River, which many critics believe to be Wayne's best performance, makes this assessment all the more poignant. However, viewers were unaware that Hawks had initially developed the project with Scott in mind, switching to Wayne only after studio politics prevented Scott from being available. I'll count 3, and if you're not out of the house, then I'll loosen on you. If you say 3, mister, you'll never hear the man count 10. Scott never forgives the director for this alleged betrayal, and he refuses to talk to him at industry events for the rest of his life. According to Hawke's private documents, the Scott-Wayne rivalry, though hidden from public view during their lifetimes, ultimately shaped the entire Western genre in ways scholars are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Their determination to differentiate themselves from each other pushed both actors to refine and distinguish their screen personas. Wayne doubled down on his larger-than-life heroism, embracing a certain mythic quality that culminated in films like The Searchers and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Wayne represented the mythic ceremonial Western tradition, while Scott explored a gritty, more morally ambiguous frontier. Scott, on the other hand, tended toward more nuanced, psychologically complex characters in his acclaimed collaborations with directors like Bud Bedker and Sam Peckinpah, whose hatred unintentionally created a more diverse Western genre. According to film critic Andrew Saras, the division extended to supporting casts, with character actors like Lee Van Cleef, James Coburn, and Richard Boone appearing exclusively in Scott's later westerns, while Ward Bond, Harry Carey Jr., and Ben Johnson became mainstays in Wayne productions. This division created distinct acting companies that contributed to the various atmospheric qualities of their respective films, giving audiences the benefit of this rivalry without ever realizing it. Most importantly, audiences were watching a genre split along the battle lines of the Scott-Wayne feud without even realizing it. Their feud indirectly shaped the anti-Western movement of the 1960s and 1970s. Scott's later films, with their morally compromised heroes and psychological complexity, served as a template for the revisionist westerns that would eventually challenge and deconstruct the very mythic tradition Wayne represented. The evolution of the western from mythic simplicity to moral complexity paralleled these men's determination to carve out distinct artistic territories. Take director Sam Peckinpah, who collaborated with Scott but never with Wayne. The Scott-Wayne feud is the epitome of Hollywood hatred, a vendetta sparked by career sabotage, fueled by betrayal on the blacklist, and sustained with unwavering purpose until death. The Academy Awards confrontation, Scott's bullet-riddled target of Wayne, and his deathbed refusal of reconciliation reveal a level of genuine animosity rarely seen even in an industry known for oversized egos and grudges. What started with Wayne's devious tactics to secure the stagecoach role turned into a decades-long blood feud that changed both men's careers and left physical and psychological scars that never healed. Unlike manufactured publicity rivalries, their hatred was deeply personal and dangerously real. Perhaps most remarkable is how thoroughly this feud was kept hidden from the public during both men's lifetimes. The last word on their legendary hatred rightfully belongs to John Ford, the director whose stagecoach decision unintentionally started the decades-long feud. Behind the scenes, they waged a brutal war that contradicted everything those screen characters represented, even though they presented strength, honor, and moral clarity through their Western heroes. Ford said, "I sometimes wonder if I'm responsible for the bitterest rivalry Hollywood has ever seen," in a 1964 letter to producer Hal Wallace that was just found. "I might have ruined Scott's career and damaged something in him that would never mend by picking Wayne for Ringo." As a result, both guys were able to be exactly who they needed to be on screen. As the films of both men continue to define the Western genre for new generations, few viewers realize they are watching two legends who would have happily destroyed each other given the chance. Wayne, the embodiment of American certainty, and Scott, the questioner of those same certainties, created two perfect opposing forces in the Western tradition, and like the North and South Poles, they defined each other by their absolute opposition. However, God help anyone who got caught between them. If you enjoyed this glimpse into Hollywood's hidden history, please remember to like and subscribe for more revelations from the golden age of cinema. Their iconic cowboy personas, forever linked in film history, conceal what may have been Hollywood's most perfect hate, a hatred that outlasted both men and continues to separate their legacies even today. Thank you for joining us on this tour beyond the meticulously maintained facade of the silver screen. Please let us know in the comments which famous Hollywood feud you would want us to study next.